We're back with Season 2 of the Point2Point NHL Recap Show. I'm Pascal Pryor, joined by Mark Havelack, and we got a lot to go through today. We're going to do our season previews, going to give some little fantasy advice. We got Josh, who's going to be doing that first later on the episode, so stick around if you're in a fantasy league and you want some good fantasy advice. The guy won the league championship last year, right? Like, he's on top of the world right now. You want his advice if you're in the fantasy world. But before we get on into all the big news around the NHL and doing our previews of the Eastern Conference, Mark, we were off for a while. Nice little long summer off. We both definitely needed it. How was your summer off, man?
Dude, pretty good. Honestly, enjoyed it. It was kind of, besides working, just like up at my cottage a lot, kind of enjoyed it. Couple months off. Honestly, after a bit, though, I was kind of ready to get back at it with hockey. It was at the end of June, though, the Stanley Cup Finals was. We're beginning of October here now. Honestly, a couple days away the season started. I am pumped, dude. Honestly, it was probably one of the best seasons last year, I thought. Like, a lot of drama. You know what I mean? Honestly, just some good quality hockey. Stanley Cup Finals, like 3-0 comeback. Like, I'm pretty ready to go for this season, man.
Oh, I'm pumped for this season, man. I had a good summer off, got to do some traveling, working, just little weekend trips here and there. But man, I'm absolutely pumped that hockey's back. It's great to be back recording. Beer League's back for me, so I'm fully in the swing of hockey right now. Let's start off though with the NHL and how it's coming back and the important dates for the start of the NHL season. The NHL season, it's going to be kicking off the 2024-25 season when the Buffalo Sabres play the New Jersey Devils in the NHL Global Series in Prague, Czechia. The season opener is set for Friday, October 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and then they also play a Saturday game at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so get up early for that one because we got a little doubleheader action there. But then the North American season, it starts off on Tuesday, October 8th with a triple header, and it's highlighted by the Florida Panthers raising their first Stanley Cup championship banner. It's going to be an absolutely wild weekend and wild early next week with the NHL opening up. Let's get into our Atlantic preview though, Mark. This episode, we're going to be doing Atlantic and Metro. Eastern this weekend. Next week we'll be doing the Western. Let's start off with the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers. Of course, they're coming up for their first Stanley Cup win in franchise history. And over the offseason, they lost a few star players, most notably Brandon Montour, but they re-signed their 50-goal scorer Sam Reinhart to an 8-year, $69 million deal. I like this team, dude, a lot again this year. How are you feeling about them, though?
I think their team changed probably a little bit more than some people might think with losing Brandon Montour up front too. Like, a lot of their depth is quite different than it was in that Stanley Cup final with like Poso's gone. Steven Lorentz might be signing with the Leafs. You know what I mean? Nick Cousins has gone to Ottawa. So there's a little bit of change with this team, right? But their core's still there. Honestly, I think they're coming in as a potential to win this division. I think they're probably aren't on paper as good of a team, but I think that once it comes like playoff time and once they're in, it's not really going to matter. They're going to probably make some additions at the deadline. You know what I mean? Their defense, I think, definitely got a little bit worse with like Montour going out, Nate Schmidt kind of coming in. You know what I mean? Pretty nice ad though for like $900K, I think, after like he got bought out by the Jets. I'm still pretty confident in this team, though, that they have a chance to like win the Stanley Cup again. I wouldn't say with the roster they have right now that they're like they could still go on a run, but I wouldn't say they're winning the cup with it. I think they could probably use like another forward. Like they brought in Tarasenko last year, you know what I mean? Like he's gone. Like I said, they lost Montour. But honestly, like I think too, like I think Bobrovsky might take a couple like less starts this year, and we're gonna see a little bit more of like Spencer Knight, to be honest. And I think he's still got a ton of potential in my opinion, right? After he was in the player assistance program, spent like all last season in the AHL. Like, dude, he's still like 23 years old. Like he's really young. Was a really high pick, you know what I mean? So I'm pretty confident in their goaltending as well all around. And I think they definitely have a shot to win this division.
Yeah, I still like this team a lot, to be honest. Like, as we mentioned, there was a decent bit of move. The only real big loss, though, was Montour, I feel. Like, the other players, like, those are replaceable players that Florida can replace throughout the season, right? As you mentioned, they need a forward up front. Like, I also think they could use a forward or two, get a little bit more depth scoring, because last year they had a decent bit of depth scoring, but going into the season, they don't have as much depth scoring. That's going to be available at trade deadline. I'm not too worried for this team. They got their main core group of players coming back. Like Sam Reinhart's coming back, Kachuk's back, Bennett's back. You got your captain Barkov, right? Like the main core of the players are all coming back, and that's really what I'm looking at here because all those other players are interchangeable, and you can have some of those guys in the lineup or out of the lineup, or go out and find those other guys. But the way this core plays and the way they play all 82 games in the regular season, like it's playoff hockey, like that's what I really like about this team. And honestly, I think this team's going to be on top of the Atlantic again this year. And when you look at their goaltending too, like Bob, we all thought the guy's career was he was on the back nine of his career, and then look at the season he had last year in the playoff run, and now we're all here like, man, like Bob's a sure thing Hall of Famer. What's he going to do now this season? Like the narrative on him has completely changed. Spencer Knight's still there. What happens with him? Does he get some more starts? Maybe do we even see Florida using his trade bait at some point? Like if he starts to have a really good start to the season, like that's an interesting thing I could see happening with him. But overall, I really like this team, and I think they're winning the Atlantic again this year, to be honest.
I could definitely see it happening. I think they're definitely gonna have a shot, and I think they're probably gonna have they're probably gonna go like all in at the trade deadline once again because they're
Yeah.
gonna be near the top of that Atlantic division. You know what I mean? So I would expect them to potentially even go back to the Stanley Cup Finals. Like we'll see, right? It's kind of wide open in this Eastern Conference, I think.
Yeah, just the last thing with him before we move on to the next team is you also got to remember who's in charge there. They got Bill Zito, right? And from what we've learned about Bill Zito over his careers, he's not afraid to make the risky move or the big bold move, right? So I think that's going to help out this team a lot in the season and what trades they make and acquisitions they try to go out and really look for. The next team in the Atlantic, Boston Bruins. This team, man, they're the center of the hockey drama right now. Jeremy Swayman, is he going to start the year with them? We don't really know. He's an unsigned RFA right now, but they went out. They got Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zorov in free agency. I like those pickups. What do you sort of think about Boston though?
I think like roster wise, they're probably like pretty similar to what they were last season. To be honest with you, their defense might honestly be even better. And
Yeah.
this team's like relied on a lot of defensive play the last couple seasons, right? In accordance to their success. So I think they're definitely going to be a playoff team once again. I'm not too sure where exactly. Like I'm kind of not convinced they might be like a top two team in the Atlantic Division, but and it's hard to really judge right now with this whole Swayman thing going on, right? But I think they've got a really solid decor, dude. Like we're gonna see a lot more of Mason Lowry this year too. Like he might be playing the top four, he might be playing on the bottom pair. They've got a really solid left side with like Lindholm, Zadorov, and and Mason Lowry there, right? And even the other guys they have, just solid all around. Their forwards, honestly, like I don't really think it's the scariest group to look at. Like obviously Pasternak's a star player. I think Marchand's probably gonna have even better of a season. He was kind of off last year. The pickup for Lindholm, I think is pretty solid. You're obviously really familiar with him in Calgary. Like I don't know, it might seem like a little bit, kind of like a lot of money considering the season he came off of, but I kind of expect him to put up better numbers just playing with Pasternak, to be honest. That I
Yeah.
don't think it's gonna like seem like an overpay. But I don't know, this team, like they don't really scare me in the sense to like win the cup, but like I think they're definitely good enough that they're gonna be a playoff team. But it is also gonna depend on Swayman. Like I don't think this is gonna end up with a trade. I think they're gonna end up solving it, to be honest with you. Even if it might go into the season, I don't really see a scenario where they're gonna trade him.
Yeah, it feels like they're getting closer and closer each day. This sort of gets talked about. Like at one point, we were talking about how it sounded like Boston may be offering them like less than $7 million a year, right? And we were like, "How are you doing that?" But now it sounds like Swayman's like really looking for 8.5, and Boston's at like 7.8, 7.9. So it sounds like we're getting closer to Swayman signing day by day. Honestly, I don't really think they're going to trade him or he'll go out and request a trade. But yeah, like right now with this Boston team, it's sort of hard to gauge where they're going to finish in the Atlantic. I also think they'll be making the playoffs, but I don't know if it's going to be a wild card or if it's going to be the 2 or 3 seed in the Atlantic Division. Just because having your number one goalie out potentially a month, 2 months, like we don't know what the full length he's going to be out for if he is out at all, right? So it's a bit hard to gauge that there.
Yeah.
Um, The Lindholm signing, though, man, I love that for Boston because the one thing Boston has really lacked the last couple of years since Patrice Bergeron retired was just having that number one center. Elias Lindholm, I don't think he's a true number one center, but with the Calgary Flames, he showed that he can be on that top line and succeed there, right? Like the one year when he was
When
playing,
surrounded with really good players, he can play at like a even higher level. Like, yeah,
yeah, like when he was on a line with Gaudreau and Kachuk, that was arguably the best line in the NHL that year. Right now, he's going to be on a line with Pasta. Like all he has to do is just get the puck to Pasta
yeah.
and
Like,
let
would
that
you
guy
be
put it in the back of
surprised
the
if
net.
he's putting up like 35 goals and 80 points? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he
I
has
w
like
I
a
wouldn't be
season like
surprised at
that.
all.
You know what I mean? He's got the potential to do that when he's like I don't think he's good enough to drive his own line and have be like a really successful first liner, but I mean, I think he can be on a first line and be successful around really good players. And it's not a knock on him at all. But I mean, he's putting himself in a very good situation. You know what I mean? He's going to get all the opportunity to play with Pasternak, Marchand. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think I don't think it's a bad signing at all. You know what I mean? I think it was pretty expected. Like, were you really surprised he signed with Boston? Like, I thought that was probably a top team he'd probably consider going to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think last year, like at Christmas time, when there was like we were talking about even like does Lindholm go to Boston at some point? Like since Lindholm, since the start of last season, when we all knew Lindholm was sort of out the door at Calgary, we all thought Boston was going to be a potential landing spot, whether it was via trade last year or free agency. So yeah, it was no surprise at all. But the other signing in Zadorov, that's another signing I really like. Playing with McAvoy, like I think it's really going to allow McAvoy to be a lot more offensive minded now. Just having that pure shutdown defenseman in Zadorov, like like McAvoy, he's always been a very good two-way defender, but when you look at him compared to some of the other top defensemen around the league, the one thing maybe you can say that he doesn't have as much is that offensive production. But now having Zadorov like as a pairing, like I think he's really gonna have an offensive breakout type year this year for the Boston Bruins. And then their goaltending, if Swayman comes back, they're going to be fine. With Corpusalo, Corpusalo is a massive question mark. But Josh will mention this later on in the podcast. Look at what Boston did with Allmark when he came over, right? Like, will they be able to do that with Corpusalo potentially? Sort of
I think it's a
revive his
bit different
career?
though. Like Allmark was not bad before he came
Yeah.
From Buffalo, right? But like, yeah, I mean, I get it. Doesn't Corpusalo's had flashes where he's looked really good, right? But you're playing behind a completely different defense too. So
Yeah, I know for me, honestly, I think I'm gonna have this team finishing in the first wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. Just I don't think they have as many top dogs compared to some of these other guys in the East. And the whole Swayman thing, it's scaring me a little bit. Just before we move on though to our next team, Mark, if you're the Boston Bruins, what's your number for Jeremy Swayman? If he's actually going to hold out, what's the top number you're giving him?
I've said this for a while now. I'd give him 8 by 8.5.
8 years by 8.5 million?
Yeah, I would be okay with giving him that.
I'm all with you there, man. Like I don't know why they haven't done that yet because they traded their number one, so this guy could now be their full-time number one. You got to give him the money.
Yeah.
Let's let's move on to the next team though. It's the close one, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Honestly, despite what a lot of fans were sort of hoping for, they were hoping for the change this offseason, trade Marner, trade somebody in the core. We really did not see that happen. The big change with this team, though, is they went out and got a new head coach, Craig Berube, and now Morgan Riley, he probably also has his best defensive partner in his entire career with Chris Tanev coming in free agency. I sort of like the moves that this Toronto Maple Leafs team has made, to be honest. How are you liking them?
I think they had a pretty solid offseason, to be quite honest with you. I think that they addressed a couple needs. I think it's the whole Marner thing is just a whole difficult situation, right? Like basically he's got a no move clause, so it's like I don't know, you're not going to trade Matthews, Nylander, you just re-sign them. You can't really trade Tavares either. I think they're just kind of waiting for his contract to expire, maybe figure out with Marner what they're going to end up doing. But like, I mean, Tavares, even if he does re-sign next year, like that 11 million is going way down,
Yeah.
right? It's going to be probably like half of that or even less, right? So they're probably going to be able to go out next season and address more like bottom six, like try to get some scoring and like even like some stronger guys. But like defense wise, I mean, yeah, like pretty solid. I mean, I wouldn't say their decor is like scary, but like it's definitely better. And like if Hawk and Paw's kind of like their 6'7" type guy, like he's a big guy, pretty solid. Like I like Chris Tanev. I mean, that contract's probably not going to age well, but I think they're kind of banking that he's probably going to get hurt, like probably on the back half of that contract, to be honest with you, because
Robot
he's signed like
Island.
40 years old. Um, OEL is not a bad pickup either. I just don't know how that's going to age over 4 years at 3.5. But I mean, it's another guy to like help. Like the one thing they kind of struggle with too, besides Morgan Riley, is like getting the puck up the ice to like the big guys. You know what I mean? Without just like flipping it out of the zone. OEL definitely helps with that. I just don't really like trust him a lot, like on the defensive side. He's just more of like an offensive guy, I think, for the second pair. They re-signed Liljegren too, like 2 years, 3.5. Honestly, I kind of like bringing in Stolars. I've always been a fan of him. He's a big guy. He's only ever really played in a backup role, but if you look at his numbers, like he's been a really solid goalie, like throughout like the past couple seasons, I'd say like 2 by 2.5, like not a bad risk. I don't think whatsoever. You know what I mean? And I think Joseph Wall's going to get like every opportunity to be the starter. I think he's a really solid goalie. It's just he's struggled to stay healthy, right? So I think that's going to be really key for him this season. But those two are going to push each other as well. I don't think it's a bad tandem whatsoever. So honestly, like as a Leaf fan, I'd be pretty happy with this off season. It's obviously just a bunch of question marks what's going to happen with like one of your best players this off season and what you're doing with that. But I mean, like, there's no doubt I think they're a playoff team and I'd probably have them above Boston, like in second in the Atlantic.
Yeah, I have them finishing second in the Atlantic right now, just behind Florida. The thing I like about what the Leafs did over the offseason was they didn't make any rash decisions. Like, yeah, you could have traded Marner, somebody in the core, and shake things up. That's what a lot of fans were really wanting. But if they were to do that, I feel like it sort of would have been a rash decision, and they wouldn't have been able to capitalize on it. Where it's now you're sort of pushing it back. If he wants to walk in free agency, let him walk in free agency, and then you have all this cap space to sign, right? Like you're not forcing a trade. Where if they were to trade Marner in the offseason, they probably would have been sort of forcing a trade unless something like absolutely fabulous came across. But at that point, I don't think it was going to happen. And the other thing is Mitch Marner really holds all the power with his no trade clause, right? But then, as you talked about with their defensive signings, going out and getting Tanev, that's massive for Morgan Riley. Morgan Riley, pardon me. Like Morgan Riley, when you look at the defenseman he's been paired with over his career with Toronto, like who's the best defenseman he's probably been paired with? TJ,
I think Brody, but like Brody has been going downhill. Like he was probably better when he got here, right? So
yeah, it was,
Brody's been a pretty solid defensive defenseman for the most part, but not recently. But I'd say probably Brody at his best. Like
and yeah, I
I
think Chris
prefer
Tanev
Chris,
and
to be honest.
Brody are going to be in two completely different levels. And then you go out and you get OEL. I think OEL is going to be massive for just getting the puck to the forwards. Like when you have a forward group that's this good, you have Nylander, you have Marner, you have Matthews, JT. Like JT, yeah, he's taken a lot of heat, but he's still a very good player. When you have OEL getting those guys the pucks and those forwards don't have to go find the puck coming out of their own end, it's going to make a massive difference in your transition game. And I think the other thing OEL is really going to help out with is that power play, right? We saw him do it with Florida last year. He was pretty good on that power play when he got his opportunities. I think he'll help out with the Leafs power play, whether it's on the first unit or the second unit. We'll sort of have to see where he's playing there. The goalies, honestly, I like that they got Stolarz. Joseph Woll, I like him. The only thing is, can he stay healthy this year? Right? He's had a bit of injury problems in the past. He hasn't really been able to play a full season as a goaltender. So if he gets injured and you have to go to Matt Murray and have him in the net for a couple games, honestly, I'd be a little worried about that. But overall, I do like this Leafs team, and I do have him finishing second in the Atlantic Division.
Yeah, and also they also gave Joseph Wall a 3 year extension that's starting next year at 3.66. So I think honestly, kind of a pretty solid extension, especially if he can stay healthy and he's playing the way he is, or even better. I think that's a pretty solid contract to have like two goalies like under $7 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
Uh,
for Joseph,
I was just
Pittsburgh
gonna say
goes
the
for
other thing too, like Nick Robertson kind of holding out, like wanting a trade, then like caves in, signs that deal for 875K. If, I don't know. If I were him, I'd kind of want an opportunity under another coach, just kind of see how it goes, you know? Like we saw that with DeBrusque, right? He wanted to trade, then Montgomery comes in, he likes him after, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I guess like for him, I think he's making the better decision to stay and like give it a shot. Like, who knows, dude? If he plays well, he might get a shot in the top six, like on the left side. Like there's a lot of different possibilities they can do, right? Like Nylander's starting to play center. That opens up a right wing spot. You know what I mean? There's a lot of competition for roster spots, I think, with this team, right? Like they kind of have a full roster, and then we're talking like Pacioretty and Lorentz are on PTOs, right? Like Easton
Yep.
Cowan, is he making the team before, or is he going back to London? You know what I mean? They re-signed Max Domi this offseason, 4 years, 375. I think it's a pretty solid contract, dude. He can play on third line, second line. He's played well with Matthews. He can play center, play the wing. Honestly, he seems like he wanted to be there too. Like this guy was on what, like all these 1 and 2 year contracts. He got a little bit of security. Good for him. Yeah, I just think I don't really know how the roster is going to end up shaping out with. Seems like they're going to sign Pacioretty, right? But they don't really
Yeah.
have the cap space, so someone's got to go on waivers or get traded. That makes like a little bit of money. So, in my opinion, I think it's either going to be like Timmins gets like sent down, or they try to trade one of like Camp or Yarncroke. That's what I think is probably going to end up happening. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. The biggest question mark, and not like a question mark in the sense of a worry, but just like how are the lines going to fold out is the forward group with this team. Like when you look at the players they have, man, they can flip flop the lines, change stuff out like a lot with the players and the personnel that they have. Like when we talk about Boston, that first line, you know it's going to be Lindholm, Pasta, and then either Zaka or Marchand on the left wing, right? But like with this Leafs team, maybe Robertson gets a few games on that top line if he's performing good. Domi and Matthews last year looked phenomenal. Like maybe they try that out again for a few games. Nylander's at center right now. Maybe they move him to the wing at some point and move Domi to the center. Like there's a lot of different changes that can
There
happen
is.
with this forward group throughout the season where I think a lot of other teams like don't fully have that. But I honestly I think it's good for the Leafs because when you look at some of the players in their bottom six, like Bobby McMahon, you got Homer, you got Robertson, as you mentioned, like Pacioretty, even Easton Cowan. Like there's a lot of players here that are going to be wanting to take
So it's
jobs.
also like we haven't even mentioned like this is a contract year for Nyes, right? Like I think he's going to get every opportunity to be in the top six as well, and we might even see an extension throughout the season from him too, especially if he starts playing well. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of different possibilities. I think it's just like one thing that I've noticed is like they've got to have their lines like figured out when the playoffs come because like
Yep.
Keith did way too much of that line juggling, right? But honestly, it's a new coach, right? Like it's you got to expect kind of the way things are operated differently. So I'm kind of interested to see how they end up doing under a new coach, right? And he's a tougher guy. He's won a cup recently, so we'll
Yeah,
see how it goes.
it'll
But I say second in the Atlantic right now for them.
yeah, it'll be definitely a fun season to watch with them with all the guys trying to prove themselves and all the negotiations with Marner and all that. But let's move on to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Man, their offseason was a very surprising one. Let's say that. They pretty much just swapped out star players over the offseason. They let their longtime captain Steven Stamkos walk away in free agency after an absolute joke of a negotiation that Tampa pretty much sent to him. But with that cap space, they go out, they get Jake Gensel in UFA. And then on the back end, they trade away Sergachev, who missed pretty much all of last year. And with that freed up cap space, they go and they trade for Ryan McDonough to bring him back. I like the moves they made. To be honest, like I straight up on paper, like the morale aspect of it, I hate the moves. Like what they did to Steven Stamkos, I hate that. But when I look at it on paper, bringing in Jake Gensel and then bringing back Ryan McDonough, I do like those moves. What do you just first off, Mark, Steven Stamkos, that whole sort of process, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it kind of sucked, man. Like he was getting a really low ball just because of the the aspect of them wanting cap space, but like, yeah, I miss him. It must have sucked for him, right? Because he would have taken way lower than what he even got in Nashville to stay there, and I just thought he was going to be there for his whole career. And I mean, they were really serious about it and kind of changing, I guess, a core piece of their team, right? But I can't really say I disagree with you. Like them bringing in Gensel, I think he's gonna. I think that line of with him and Point and Kucherov is gonna be so nasty, man. I think it's just gonna change the power play up a little bit the way they operate because now you're bringing in a left-handed shooter instead of having Stamkos there on defense. I mean, Sergachev, that's a big move to make, right? But they wanted to free up the cap space. He made $8.5 million. JJ Moser's not a bad defenseman, man. The guy they brought back, he's young as well. They re-signed him, brought in Connor Geeky. He might even have a chance to make this team as well.
Yep.
The bottom six. So honestly, I think they're probably going to end up finishing like in a wild card spot again, maybe third in the Atlantic. I don't really think they're as good as the Leafs, at least on paper. And I'd say they're probably similar to like they're probably better than Boston, I guess. But I mean, I could still kind of see Boston finishing ahead of them. Be a little bit different for them this year having Vasilevsky like from the start of the year now because he played a lot of games last year, but he missed like 2 months, right? So he kind of had a bit of a down year too. So I kind of expect him to rebound. But I think this team's definitely going back to the playoffs. Just curious to see what they're going to do once they get in the playoffs. Because, dude, they just brought in, as good as Stamkos is, like, dude, they just brought in like a guy who's like a huge playoff performer in Jake
Yep.
Gensel. Like he's nasty in the playoffs, and I think that's a huge reason why they wanted him and wanted to commit $9 million because he's young still. He's won a cup. He was performing in the playoffs even with Carolina. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think they're definitely a playoff team, but I don't know if they really scare me to win the cup right now. Like a lot of other moves are like depth, like Atkinson and Gurgensons, but they have pretty good decor. Goalie's obviously really good, and they've got the star players, right? So
Yeah, I think they finished third in the Atlantic. It's either them or Boston that's going to finish third, I think, and then the other one will finish in a wild card spot. For me, the biggest thing with this Tampa team, though, is as you mentioned, Vasilevsky, like they're going to have him to start the season. I think he's going to have a real bounce back season. When you look at him last year, he was injured a bit. He had an off year. I think the reason he was injured and had an off year was just think about the amount of extra games he's played to most of these other goaltenders around the NHL just because of all the cup runs Tampa had gone on the years previous, right? Like this is the longest offseason he's had probably over the past 5 years now. So I think he's gonna come back healthy and perform very well this season. I think he's gonna return to his normal self and be up in the Vesna conversation. But yeah, I still do like this team. I think their first line is going to be debatably one of the best lines in the NHL, if not the best. Like you have Braden Point, maybe the most underrated center in the NHL, with Nikita Kucherov and then Jake Gensel. Like have fun stopping that line if you're on the ice against them. The thing for me though is their depth. I don't know about some of their depth. Like Cam Atkinson, he's a
yeah,
decent player, but
that's the huge question mark to me, right? And I think that's more like I think that's more of a question mark once like playoffs come and depending how much they contribute during the season as well as obviously going to depend. It'll depend obviously where they finish in the standings, but I still think if their depth like isn't good during the season, they'll probably still good enough to get to the playoffs. But think about the years when they won the cup, right? They had really good depth,
yeah.
like Yanni Gord with Gaudreau and Coleman. Like they don't have that right now. You know what I mean? I don't know if they can go out and get that at the deadline. I think they're kind of lacking too many pieces for that. But I mean, I guess we'll see. They seem like they're just getting guys cheap if they can on a couple year deals. Like Atkinson got bought out, signed. Like Gurgensons will give you 950K for 3 years. Like they need that. You know what I mean?
When you're in Tampa's shoes and the amount of picks they've given up over the last 5 years and prospects they've given up, right? Like Geeky is the only prospect really that they've probably going to bring into their lineup over the past since they've been going on these cup runs, right? Like they really
Yeah.
don't have any youth in their team. They don't have too many picks. Like it, it's definitely catching up to Tampa, but what they did in free agency and making the moves they made, trading away Sergachev and bringing back McDonough, that's sort of helped them out. Where this whole lack of youth and lack of draft capital is, it's not catching up to them, pardon me, as quick as we all thought it was going to. But yeah, I think they finished pardon me, third in the Atlantic. It's between them and Boston, but Boston's goaltending with Swayman potentially sitting out just scares me a little bit more than it does with Tampa's team. Let's move on to the Detroit Red Wings, though. This is going to be an interesting season for them. I think they have their noses really all over making the playoffs. This is a team that's missed out of the playoffs the last few seasons when they've been very close. The biggest moves they sort of made was internally. They re-signed Lucas Raymond to an 8-year, $64 million deal and Moritz Seider to a 7-year, $59 million deal. I don't know how they lock these guys up for that long and that amount of money. How do you feel about these contracts?
I think they're pretty solid contracts, to be quite honest with you. I think Stevie Y wanted to keep it like under Larkin at 8.7. And I think apparently if Sider wanted an 8th year, he was looking at over 9. So I think they just couldn't really make it work. And they just decided on that 7 years. I think it's pretty fair for both of them, to be honest. Like, I think Sider's got a little bit more potential than Raymond. Yeah, even though I think he's going to be a great player and he's already really good, right? But I think Sider has like the potential to be a number one defenseman. Like, I wouldn't be surprised in 3 years if we're talking about him being like a top 10 D in the league, to be quite honest with
Yeah.
you. I think this is a really good number and it's going to age well for both of these guys. I think it's even better deal for Sider, though, to be honest with you. I think it's a really solid number. I honestly thought he was going to get over 9. Um, dude, I don't know about this team, man. Like, I just, they made some pretty decent moves this offseason. Like, Tarasenko comes in, Patrick Kane's coming back. They've got a really solid top 6. I'm just not really that convinced with their depth, and I just don't really know how good their D core is. And honestly, like their goaltending still a question mark too, man. Like it's like, are we gonna get a really good Cam Talbot? Like I don't know. Like Lyon's a decent goalie, but it's like he's not a starter really. And Husso's been like he's been pretty much hurt the last like year and a
Yeah.
bit, playing on and off, and he hasn't played good when he's been healthy. I don't know. Like it's like if they were in the same situation they were last year, I wouldn't really be surprised, like even making the playoffs. But like to be honest with you, like if I'm making my final picks right now, like I don't have them making the playoffs. Like I probably have them just right outside the playoffs, like competing probably right to the end, maybe even like last year. But I just don't know. I think there's too many question marks with this team. But I think they got a really solid top 6, dude. They've got a guy who can be a number one defenseman. It's just like it's a drop off after that, man. It's like Jake Wallman's gone. He was Sider's partner. I think Simone Edvinson's going to get a shot. That young
Yeah.
prospect. I think he's probably going to play maybe second pair, maybe third pair. But then who are their other guys? You're looking at Sherratt, you're looking at Petrie, you're looking at Oli Mata, and you're looking at Eric Gustafson, who they just signed. Like I don't know, dude. Like I don't know if that's good enough, man.
I completely agree with you with that. Where like their top end guys, man, are really good players like DeBrincat, Larkin, Raymond. You got Patty Kane, you got Sider.
I think
And
that
then
top 6 is really solid, minus like if JT Compher's your second line center. Like I'd probably prefer him to be a third line center, but like it's still a really good top 6, I think. You know what I mean?
oh yeah,
But
like
after
I
that,
like
it's
the
like
top
your
six.
depth is like Rasmussen, like Tyler Mott, like Veleno. It's like I don't really know. Like those guys were supposed to be pieces of the puzzle. They were drafted like pretty high, dude, like first round, like even later in the first round. But I don't even think they've really turned out to be more than like kind of bottom 6 guys. And even like another guy, their bottom 6, like Robbie Fabry, he's gone now. Like he was decent in their bottom 6, man. Like I don't know. Like it's like I can see them making the playoffs, but I wouldn't be that surprised if they didn't make it because I think they still got a lot of question marks.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is a bubble team. I don't know if they're going to be in the playoffs or out of the playoffs. I think it's going to be really close, within like 5 points even. The more I'm thinking about it, honestly I don't think they make the playoffs, man. I think their defensemen like Sherratt, Petrie, Gustafson. I really don't like that.
Nada,
And
like it's not like those guys
yeah,
are NHL defensemen. It's just like they're more like okay, Gustafson, you could probably put him in the top 4, he'd be fine. But like the other guys, it's like you probably want him on your bottom pair, dude. And it's just like, and honestly, it also depends how if Edvinson is playing like It depends what kind of
Yeah.
season. It's like he could come in and be a solid top four defenseman, maybe even playing with Sider, and they're really good. Like I think he's going to be like basically there's a shot where he could be the second best defenseman on this team, like by the end of the
Yeah.
season. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But like he's also, I kind of think a couple years behind schedule. Like I think he probably should have been in the NHL already,
That's fair to say.
but I don't know, right? He's a very high pick, right, in the top 10. So it's really their defense is really going to depend how he does as well, and if Sider can handle the workload. Because dude, Sider hasn't really had a very good NHL partner since he's been in the NHL. You know what I mean?
The best player he's probably ever played with on defense was Hronek, and that was for like half a season until Hronek got dealt, right? Like,
Well, and even that, it's like they're both right-handed guys, so they weren't really playing together that long. Like we're talking lefties, it's probably like Ghostosphere.
that's yeah, that's not too great. But yeah, like this defenseman core, I don't like it that much. Like if they had really good goaltending, it doesn't scare me as much, but their goaltending sort of meh as well. So I don't think this team makes the playoffs. I think they just fall short for the second year in a row, to be honest. Let's move on to a team that's pretty close. I think it's going to be another sort of bubble team here. It's the Buffalo Sabres. They're really they're looking for their young guys to take a leap this year, man. They got 10 players under the age of 25 to help with that process of getting these players up to par. They brought in Lindy Ruff, who he had a lot of success with the New Jersey Devils just 2 years ago, and when they had a younger team. And I think Buffalo, they will take the step. The other thing too is their goaltending looks a little bit more secure this year compared to the last few years. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, he had a great year last year, and after his breakout year, he signed a 5-year, $23.75 million deal. What do you sort of make about the Buffalo Sabres?
Yeah, this is gonna be this is like kind of like a make or break year, I think, for this team in accordance to I think if they miss the playoffs, Kevin Adams' job is probably gone. I think even some pieces of the core could be moved, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
Darlene was named the captain recently as well. I think that was probably much deserved. I don't think this team's making the playoffs, dude. I don't know if this team is as good as they were last year, to be quite honest with you, even on paper. Jeff Skinner's out. I know that's a bad contract, but man, he's still a consistent 30 goal scorer. Some of these young guys are going to have to step up, dude. JJ Paterka had a pretty solid year last year. I wonder if he can take another step and be like a bona fide top six forward. One guy that I'm honestly keeping my eye on this year is Jack Quinn. I think this kid, he's got such a sick shot, man. He could score 30 goals, I think. If he can stay healthy, does he do that? Like, does Zach Benson have a really good sophomore year? Like, he had
Yeah.
30 points last year. He was 18. Does he take a step, dude? Like, he had a better season than Slavkovsky did as an 18-year-old. Does he take a step like that? I know they're very different players, but like, do we see him putting up 50, 60 points? They brought in some guys to kind of fill holes that have like, I guess, NHL experience, but I think this team really lacks some leadership of guys that are older.
Yeah, this is a young team.
Last year they're coming in with they got Okposo, they got Eric Johnson. Look at their team. You're talking about their age. They don't have many guys on their team that are like 32 or older. Like it's like Reimer, and I'm not even too sure who else. Like even like Gurgensons, that's a guy who's been there forever. He's gone. I think that's gonna hurt them a little bit, to be quite honest with you. I know these guys have been there for a long time. In accordance to like, I think they're changing the style they play a bit. Like they got Beck Malenstein from Washington. He hits a ton. That's kind of a guy they need in their bottom six. They bring in Aube Kubel. They bring in Lafferty. They bring in Jason Zucker. I don't know. I was kind of underwhelmed with their offseason. I think they've made moves that'll like help them. Like that, like I'm saying, like fill out roles in accordance to like hitting and stuff like that. But I think they lack leadership, and it's really going to depend on can one of these young guys like come out and explode and be like a bona fide top six forward. Like I'm pretty confident in Tage Thompson like being better.
Yeah.
Cousins is probably going to be better. Like Tuck is really solid, but someone's gonna have to fill that Skinner hole and like be even better, maybe. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't have this team making the playoffs. I do agree their goaltending is pretty solid. Luukkonen was really good, but I think that they're probably on the outside looking in.
See, I got this team as a wild card spot. I got them as the second wild card spot. Man, like Tage Thompson had a down year last year. I think he comes back to playing how he was playing before. Dylan Cousins, again, not the greatest season last year. I think he's going to be better. And then you look at some of these younger players like Benson, Quinn, Paterka. I think not all of them are going to take steps, but I think if you can have one or two of those guys take steps, like in the forward group at least, they're going to be a better team than they were last year.
I don't like. I don't. If I think if not at least two of them take steps, like I don't think they're sniffing playoffs, dude.
Oh, if at least two of
Like,
those guys don't take steps, I don't think they're in the playoffs either.
because
Honestly,
you
I'm
have to
betting that two
replace
of them
Skinner's
will.
production plus be even better.
Yeah.
What I mean?
And then honestly on their defense are young too. Like Dowling, there's no question mark about him. He's a
Oh,
superstar, right? But
he's a legit. He's legit.
you got Owen Power. He was a number one pick. You sort of he hasn't been bad in the NHL, but I don't think he's lived up to that number one pick status, right? Like I think
No.
there's some more we want to see from him. Bowen Byram, he got traded there trade deadline last season. What's he gonna do? He was a fourth overall pick, another guy who hasn't fully lived up to the hype. I want to see what he does. Like this team, there's a lot of young players, as I mentioned, 10 players under the age of 25, right? Like you need half of those guys, if not more, to take steps this season. If you guys want to make the playoffs, honestly, like I'm betting on them, man. The one thing that really hasn't helped Buffalo in previous seasons has been their goaltending. Their goaltending isn't too much of a question mark this year with Luukkonen and Reimer.
He
You
was
also
solid
got
last
you
year.
also got Levi too, who's on a two-way deal. So it's like if one of them gets injured, you can bring him up and down when you need to,
I don't
right?
mind the
So
Reimer pickup though, dude. Like being a vet guy, like even if he plays like fucking 15, 20 games, like you know what I mean? Or
yeah,
even so, no, I don't mind. I don't think their goaltending is a huge issue. Like even if Luukkonen doesn't play well, I could see Levi like stepping in and playing well. So um yeah, their D, it's like they're young, they got a lot of potential. I really wonder about like having three really good left-handed D. Who's playing the right? Honestly, their fourth best D is probably Samuelson. He's also left-handed. Does he turn into a bottom pairing defenseman? Like, it's kind of a little bit like confusing. Like Byram, it was like everyone thought he needed to be moved so he can get a bigger opportunity because he's playing behind Devon Taves. But it's like, I don't know, is he even playing on the first pair? Like, would you have him on the first pair or would you run power with Darlene? Like it's not really that much different of a situation. He's not really gonna have a chance to run the power play. Like I don't really know if Byram's gonna excel there.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of question marks with this Boston team, but I'm betting on them, so it's gonna be interesting though. Let's move on to the nation's capital, Ottawa Senators. This team, their big move over the offseason was going out and getting their goaltending figured out. They brought in Linus Ullmark, former Vezina winner. They also brought in a veteran winger, David Perron, to add some veteran scoring depth to this team of young players. What do you sort of make about them, though?
I think that they had like a pretty solid off season for the most part. Like probably the trade of the offseason, I think, like them bringing over Allmark for like what they had to give up. And they were able to get rid of that Corpusalo contract that wasn't looking too good either. Bringing in Perron, I think that's a solid add. He's won a cup, kind of has like that feistiness to his game. I think they're going to be a really like hard, like heavy and hard team to play against, to be quite honest. With Brady Kachuk, you know what I mean? He kind of sucks everyone into that kind of play style in the bottom six as well. Like they brought in Noah Gregor, like Ridley Gregg's going to be there the full season. I think they're going to like, there's going to be a chance for like a rookie to probably step in from the AHL. Like, I don't know who that's going to be, like Zach Ostapchuk, maybe, not really too sure. Shane Pinto came back on a 2-year deal too. I think that was pretty solid, like just under 4 mil, I think it was. Honestly, man, I think I have this team making the playoffs in the second wild card spot. I think that them bringing in a goalie is going to make a huge difference. Um, that Chikrin trade wasn't great. Like, but honestly, like Nick Jensen's a really solid, like defensive defenseman. I think he's like really going to help them. I think that's something that they need. Zub also plays that. And, like their left side's going to be more their offensive side with like Shabbat and Sanderson. Um, I think they might need to go out and get another like D for the bottom pair. I don't really know if they're going to go with like Bernard Docker and like Clevin. but they could probably use like, I think, a more experienced guy back there. But I think a lot of their guys are not going to have down years like they did last year, like their top end guys. And I think that goaltending is going to make a huge difference. But I mean, I think they're going to be on the fringe. I have my wild card spot, right? Like I could kind of see them missing, but I think that I think they're going to get in this year.
Yeah, see, for me, I think them and Buffalo are pretty close. I have Buffalo a step ahead of them. Just I think there's a bit more depth with Buffalo. Like when I look at Ottawa, I don't like their depth as much. Like third line, I like Ridley Grigg, Shane Pinto. We'll see what he can do this season. Adam Audio, I don't know. Honestly, I don't really like having him on the third line too much. And then the defenseman, I agree with you that that third pairing on defenseman, I think they need I think they need another defenseman for sure on this team to sort of lock up that third pairing.
But I mean, if
Maybe
they
two
bring in a
defensemen.
solid like third pair left-handed shooting defenseman, I think like their defense doesn't is not looking too bad.
I like Shabbat. I like Anderson. Shabbat hopefully can bounce back. The thing with this Ottawa team is they're hard to read, man, because for the last couple years, it's all like, when are they going to take that next big step, make the playoffs, make the playoffs? And they really like haven't done that year after year after year. And now we're at the point where they're young players that we're all thinking are going to take big steps. Like they're not so young anymore, right? Like Tim Stutzel's probably their youngest player of that caliber. And what is he, 22 now? 21, right? Like he's still young, but like the rest of the players with this team are sort of more in their primes now. Like you're getting what they have from them. Like Sanderson, I think he can take another step, right? But like Shabbat, I think Shabbat, like he is what he is at this point. I don't know how much more there is to him. Like
It's fair.
Pinto, maybe there's a bit more there, but I don't know. It's a hard it really is a hard team to judge. Like as you mentioned, they really had a bad year last year. I don't think they'll be that bad again, but I don't know how much of a step they can take from where they were last year to this season and getting to the playoffs. It's going to be interesting to see, though. The one thing, though, is they did have the worst goaltending in the NHL last year with Korpisalo. They got rid of that, brought in Allmark. I think Allmark's going to be good this year. There's no certainty that he's going to be amazing, but I I definitely
I
think
think
it's
he's
an
going to give him a
upgrade
couple
there
extra
in the
wins
net.
though, dude. I think he's
Oh
going
yeah,
to that's going to make a huge difference.
it's definitely going to make a difference. I don't know if it makes enough of a difference though for me personally to have him in the playoffs. It's definitely a close one though. Like this Atlantic division, man, like it's stacked. You put Ottawa in the Pacific, like it completely changes my mind about them, to be honest. But
Yeah.
just with this Atlantic division this year, it's so hard, man. Like there's so many teams in there that you could have in the playoffs or just outside the playoffs. It's going to be an interesting season for sure for Ottawa, though. Let's move on to your boys, your boys in Montreal, Mark. Honestly, man, I'm looking forward for this season for the Montreal Canadiens, man. This it might be the funnest young team in the NHL to watch. They already have a really young team that's very fun, and they're only adding to that. They bring in Line. Of course, he's injured now, but he's going to be coming back at some point. Lane Hudson, he's going to be on the NHL, and then Kirby Dach, he's returning from injury this year, so you're sort of getting those players coming in to an already very young and exciting lineup. We'll start off though. How do you think this team is going to pan out?
I think the one thing about this team is just like the division they're in. Like it's a really tough division where it's like I think if you put them in any other division, they're probably not the worst team in the division. But
Yep.
there's a chance that they could be the worst team in this division again for like the fourth straight season. Every other team that we're talking about that's not making the playoffs on the fringe, like those guys, they have pretty good lineups compared to Montreal, right? So it's like I can see this team coming in last in the Atlantic. I just really hope for guys to stay healthy and for progression from the young players. Hasn't started off too well. Line's out 2 to 3 months. Kind of sucks. He just came over. Was really excited to see what he could do in the top six. Just got to wait a little bit longer. Hopefully, he's able to stay healthy once he comes back. Reinbacher probably not making the team, but fifth overall pick, man, that sucks. He's out till basically February, March.
Yep.
Season's like dwindling down. It's really gonna put a stop to his kind of like progression as a prospect, right? I am excited though. Lane Hudson's kind of bringing in a different dynamic on defense that I don't want to say we don't have because Matheson's pretty dynamic back there, but it's different still the way that he moves compared to Mike Matheson. Does he take over the first power play this year? Does he become like a top four defenseman like this season? Like I don't know. Like he's definitely like turning heads the way he skates. He's a very great passer, right? He's small. How is he going to defend? He's been pretty good defending, like in the NCAA and even before that. But the NHL is different, right? You're smaller. He's going to have to use his body, but also like kind of be smart. I'm excited for him. Very excited for Kirby Dach, man. I really want to see what this guy can do in a full 82 games because I think
Yeah.
his size, he's a big guy. I think he could be a really solid second line center, and I think he's got kind of potential to prove that. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's like like playoffs isn't even like on my radar. Like these people talking about them making the playoffs. I think it's just to get people talking in the summer, man. Like they think if like Doc's healthy and Line comes in, they're a playoff team. Like I don't really buy that to be honest. Like there's still too many young guys. Like even if Hudson is like legit right off the bat, it's like he doesn't make them have like a top D core. Like you know what I mean? So I don't know. I think it's just like you want to see progression from the young players. I'm not really expecting a lot in accordance to like success and them like making the playoffs, but I would like them to like honestly be like if as much as it like doesn't make sense for them to finish like between like 10th and 15th in accordance to drafting next year. Like I wouldn't mind them finishing there because then it would be like, okay, like these young guys have like taken a step and like we're better. But like, I mean, if we do end up being bad, it's like we're gonna get another top pick, like or a shot at a really good guy. So it's
Yeah.
like I don't really know. It's like there's no real bad situation. And then what's the other alternative? They make the playoffs. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. When you're in the situation and like things are going in the right direction, you just kind of hope that what you've invested in is going to turn out to be good. You know what I mean? And I mean, I think that they've got the pieces where it's like you can see it. You know what I mean? That like if I could see this team competing for a Stanley Cup in the future if everything goes in, like according to plan. You know what I mean? But I mean, it's kind of a journey to get there, right? And like losing does suck, but I mean, it's kind of part of it if you're a mediocre team and you don't have these really good players, which I think that they've finally brought in. And dude, like he's not playing this year, but like even like Demidov, man, like the guy they drafted, like I'm super excited for when he's able to come over to the NHL, and I think he could be like a first line player. So
Yeah, for me, this is a team that their future, man, it looks really bright. Like some of those players aren't there yet. Like Ryan Bacher, we mentioned, he's injured, but even the way it was looking, he wasn't going to make the team out of camp. You got Demidov, who's playing overseas. Mayu, he's looks like he might get a chance this season. I like him a lot. Your goaltender, Fowler, right? Still playing in the NCAA. Like he's going to be a key part of this team's future over the next 5, 10 years when they're going on cup runs. Like man, I think your guys' future and your guys' pool of players is very, very secure and very set up. As we mentioned though, like there's some of those guys that aren't there yet and aren't making impacts yet. So w- w- for me though, as you said earlier, I think the biggest thing is you want to see these players taking leaps, right? Like Suzuki, you want to see him taking a leap. Savkovsky, he had a great, I think he had a pretty good year last year, to be honest, man. Like a lot of
he also
people
got
want,
an 8 year extension too at 7.6, which I think is
yeah,
definitely that's starting next year. I mean, man, the progression that he made, he's looking like he's going to be good, but like it's risky still, right? So hopefully he can live up to that.
yeah, like I think what you want to see this team is not to be picking top five again and to be playing more meaningful games when you're later on in the season. And when I say meaningful games, I don't mean like you're competing for a playoff spot or it's like, okay, we need this win so we're only 4 points out of the wild card spot, right? Like I don't think that's meaningful games. More what I mean in meaningful games is games where you're going in and you're playing a team and it's like, man, if we beat this team, like they might be missing the playoffs because we beat them, right? Where it's like previous years, as you guys got toward the end of the season, it was really like looking forward to the draft lottery and seeing where you guys were going to be picking, right? I don't think I don't think the Habs are really in that state of a team anymore where you need to be picking top five. I think it's more now like you have your pieces. What can these pieces do, right? Like Lane Hudson, man, we've talked about him we've talked about a fair bit when we're not on this podcast. You know how I feel about him. Dude, I love the kid, man. I think he's going to be the Brock Faber this year. Like, I think he's going to come into the NHL, have success. Dude, the way this guy skates, the way this guy handles the puck, man, his hockey IQ, like, for such a young player, dude, it's phenomenal. Mike Matheson, yeah, he's probably going to be running the first power play to start the season off. But, man, the way Lane Hudson plays, like, who's to say that a month into the season he's not taking over that first power play unit, right? Like, honestly, man, he's if I was a bet man, which I am, I'd put a little bit of money on Lane Hudson winning the Calder, dude. I think he's that good.
I think it's just going to be hard, like as a defenseman, to win. Like I think if he gets outscored by a lot, he's probably not going to really have a chance at it. There's going to be a lot of really good rookies this year too, right? So, I don't know. I don't really see him winning the Calder, to be quite honest. I could see him being like the best defenseman rookie this year. I think he's got a bright future, man. But I mean, I guess we'll just kind of see how it goes this year. He's only 21, I think so, or 20.
Yeah.
So he's got some time. You know what I mean? Defensemen sometimes take a little bit longer to kind of break out too. Like if you look at Quinn Hughes, like not that he wasn't a legit great defenseman before, but he hits this next level. You know what I mean? Like 2 years ago. So I don't know. It's just gonna take. It might take some time, but definitely, I'm excited for the season for the Habs.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be a fun team to watch this year whenever they're playing. Before we move on though from Montreal, I just have one question for you. Last night, of course, preseason, Montreal, Ottawa. How do you feel about that jack I hit?
So like my first thought was I was like, it's really freaking dirty. Watching it from another angle, he actually didn't even hit him in the head. He looked like he hit him in the chest, and then his own stick hit him in the then knocked his helmet off. But I do think that it was like vicious in the sense that he kind of went out of his way to go hit him. Like he went from being the right-handed defenseman over basically to the left side. It looked like he was like trying to I don't know if I was to try to injure him. I don't want to say that, but I think it was just kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that, man.
But I don't think he deserves like a long suspension or anything. If they suspended him, I think it'd be more for the fact that they thought it was like malicious. They probably looked at it and were like, okay, he didn't actually hit him in the head. And I think that's why they're not doing anything about it. But
yeah,
I don't know. I didn't really like to see it, to be honest. I like his style of play. It's just that I think it's just like a little bit much at times. In that, it's like I don't really think that was necessary. Like I get what happened with Doc, but earlier in the game, but I don't know. I think it was like if he wanted to do something back, I think there probably could have been like a different situation where he probably could have laid a big hit when there was a guy around him more, you know?
Yeah, and it's like the other thing for me too is it's a preseason game. I get if you're making those hits in the playoffs in a 7-game series where you're trying to you're doing whatever you can to come out of that series, right? But in a preseason game, I don't know. I was like, oh wow, Jack, I'm not surprised he's throwing that hit, but I was like, man, is that really necessary? That's also what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the Metro preview, though, we're gonna throw it over to Josh, winner of the Hockey Fantasy League from last year. He's gonna give his fantasy picks to help out with your team going into the season.
Welcome to Point Fantasy Picks. My name is Josh, and today we're going to go through some late round draft picks that you can choose in your draft that actually have value. The first guy I'm going to go with is Justin Faulk of the St. Louis Blues. With the injuries to the Blues, Justin Faulk becomes a power play 1 defenseman you can get in the late rounds, and that's super valuable. Add on to that the great peripherals he's got, like shots, blocks, and even some hits. I think this guy is a total steal of the late round. Another guy like Faulk, in a similar vein, is Brandt Clarke of the LA Kings. With Drew Doughty out long term, Brandt Clarke becomes that guy to quarterback that power play. And with some great power play pieces already on that roster, Brandt Clarke's value goes way up for a guy that could even go undrafted in your league. A forward you can get in the late rounds that I think brings great value as well is Gabe Vilardi of the Winnipeg Jets. This guy can go undrafted, and for a guy that's going to be on the top line in Winnipeg with Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele, and on a power play, with all those guys healthy, this guy has the upside to be a 30-plus goal scorer and even like a 20-plus PowerPoint player. And you're getting this guy as a final pick. That's phenomenal value. Another guy I love, and I know there's going to be some hate for this, is Jonas Korpisalo. I know. We all want Swayman there instead of Korpisalo in Boston. But do you remember what they did for Linus Ullmark in Boston? They made this guy a Vezina winner. And I'm not saying Korpisalo is as good as Ullmark, not at all. But I believe in Boston's power as a team, and I believe even in the late rounds, if you missed out on a really good goalie late, this guy is worth the risk. I believe in Boston way more than I believe in some other late round pick goalies. And for a great last pick in your draft, I think you could go with someone that maybe is on the IR right now, but is destined to come back soon. Someone like Gabe Landeskog could come back and be a stud on your team that you can get as your last pick, stash him in the IR, and get someone on the waiver wire right away. Even with Nichushkin, who may not end up not playing at all, you can take that risk by throwing in the IR and you grab someone off the waiver wire. In that sense, you're getting two people with one pick in the final pick of your draft. I think that's great value. So I hope that helps out with your guys' drafts coming up, and stick to Point for more fantasy tips.
Now that you have all your fantasy picks from Josh heading into the season, Mark, let's head on to the Metro division and sort of preview that. We'll start with the New York Rangers. Last year, they finished on top in the Metro. Didn't really have too many changes this offseason. Just Gaudreau and Gustafsson left the team. But when you look at their core, they're really bringing their entire core back. I still really like this team. They got the best goaltender in the league in net. How do you feel about them?
Yeah, I think that they're going to definitely compete toughly for the President's Trophy once again, and definitely to lead their division. I think it's going to be probably between them, and we'll get to another team eventually who I think is going to be up there. But I think they're definitely going to be on top of that Metropolitan Division, most likely, to be honest. Like you said, there's not too many changes with this team. A couple re-signings, like even bringing back Jonathan Quick. That was a mid-season deal they did, but he was a solid backup for them. Braden Schneider coming back on a short-term deal, and so is Capo Caco as well. I think Caco's definitely a guy that they're really hoping will progress this season. You know what I mean? I really feel like this is probably like his last shot with the Rangers. At this point, he really hasn't shown that. He hasn't even had like that one season where he's kind of broken out yet, right? He's shown flashes of like what he could be for sure, I think, but he doesn't really like capitalize on his opportunities a lot. I feel like he kind of like sometimes makes nice plays, and he doesn't really have a lot of finish. You know what I mean? But I think with this team too, dude, like, are we going to see another step from Lafreniere? Like, can he get to like a point per game this season? You know what I mean? Like the player that everyone thought that he was going to be when he was drafted. He looked a lot better last year, dude. He looked a lot more comfortable. I think that even went from like the playoff run the year before, kind of went into last season. And man, I think you could argue throughout the entire playoffs last year, like minus Shesterkin, like he was probably like one of their best players. Like,
yep,
he was probably at least the most consistent. You know what I mean? Like, excluding like a lot of their guys put up stats in round one against Washington and then kind of just didn't afterwards. You know what I mean? But Lafreniere just felt like all playoffs long, he was scoring like big goals for them. You know what I mean? So can he take that next step for the Rangers? I think this team, no doubt, is going to be competing for the Stanley Cup. I think that they might have to make a couple additions. I think to bolster, I think their forward depth a little bit. We'll see what happens on the left side on the third pair with them. They're going to be bringing in Zach Jones, I think. He was a prospect for them. He was playing in Hartford last year. Wonder if he's going to be good enough. Like they lost Eric Gustafsson, right? And they didn't really go out and replace him, but they're not really working with a lot of cap space either. Like the Trouba was rumored to get moved. Like if there was a team that was going to take him, not on its trade list, he doesn't get moved. I think he's probably going to end up getting moved next year, but like they got to keep him for now and use him, right? So I don't know. Do you think this team can like win the Stanley Cup, or do you think that they probably got to make a couple of moves before you think that they could do it?
Looking at the roster right now, I think they can win the Stanley Cup. But the thing is, every team that is like the Rangers, where they're going into the season as contenders, they're all going to be making moves throughout the season, right? So like the Rangers are going to need to make moves as well in the season. I think they need to add a little bit of depth scoring. I love that Hedo's going to be back though. Like Hedo, he can provide that, right? Pardon me. Maybe maybe he helps Kako and Capo Kako breaks out a little bit. Because if that happens, then they don't need depth scoring as much. It's more sort of lock up that third pairing and
He's just had that
get
injury
left side.
history, Heedle. That's the
Yeah,
problem, right?
it's
Like you
really
don't.
questionable.
Yeah, so you just don't know if you're gonna have that like 3C or not, to be honest. Like Zibanejad, Trocheck really good? Like I think that's a solid like 1-2C, but that like
That's great.
If Heedle's not healthy, like I think it's like a big drop off after, right? So
Yeah, you need to go and find a 3C if Heedle's not healthy. The other
yeah.
thing too is you mentioned Laugh, right? Like and how good he looked in the playoffs, especially if he continues that into the regular season. Like think about how good this team has already been the last like couple seasons without Laugh producing at that high level. If Laugh can be that point per game guy and producing at a high level alongside Panarin and Trocheck on that top line, like I have no doubt that this team could be a contender because you have that line and then you still got Chris Kreider and Zibanejad on your second line, right? Like they got a very good top six. Third line, there's a lot of question marks there with Capo Caco and Heedle, like with the health, and then will Capo Caco play up to what everybody thought he was going to be, or even he doesn't even have to be that guy, right? Like he just has to be a solid I think 20 goals. I think Rangers fans, if he was a 20 goal scorer, like 40, 50 points, I think Rangers fans would be pretty happy with that production from him coming on the third line. For me, though, the thing that really just like does separate this team, it's the goaltending, right? Like you have Shesterkin back there, and then Jonathan Quick, he was a great backup last year. No surprise that the Rangers organization wanted to bring him back for another season, despite his age and everything. Like he had a great season. I bet he was also a great locker room guy. But for me, honestly, I think I have this team finishing second in the Metro, not because I don't think they can't finish first, but I think with the Rangers, they're gonna look at all their regular season success over the years and the lack of like deep playoff runs, and they're gonna really prioritize like it's a long season. It's a long season. Let's get into the playoffs, get the matchup we're all right with, and then day one of the playoffs, this is where it really matters, right? Like I
Yeah.
think I think over the years New York is starting to learn that, and I think this season they're really gonna take that into account, which is why I have them finishing second in the Atlantic. Let's move on and talk about the Carolina Hurricanes. They had some major losses, honestly. This team, despite all the success that they've had recently, lost a lot of their key pieces. They lost Gensel. He was only there for about a quarter of the season last year, but they also lost Pesci and Shea, two major losses on the back end. How are you feeling?
Honestly, like Carolina probably had a lot of turnover compared to a lot of other teams in the league, I think. I think they did a decent job at replacing at least some of it, but it's really hard to replace a guy like Jake Gensel, right? Like he was even good for them in that short playoff run they had. I honestly thought he was probably going to re-sign with them, but it just seemed like the negotiations just didn't really go in that direction. You know what I mean? But Pesci, Shea, like those guys have been there for quite a while. I don't know if it was just a money thing or it was just like kind of mutual, like they wanted to move on. But those guys are two pretty good defensemen, man. They got some pretty big contracts from New Jersey and Nashville too, right? But bringing in Gostisbehere, like that's a guy they're familiar with from a couple years ago. They brought him at the deadline, offensive defenseman. You know what I mean? I think I think he's a pretty good ad for them, to be honest. Because if you look at like their other D, it's like Slavin's like more defensive, like he is kind of a little bit offensive, but he's not like Gostisbehere is like full offense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, even Burns too, like he kind of does both, but it's like he's older now too. So I don't mind the Gostisbehere ad. He's not really making much, just over 3 million. Sean Walker, like he was pretty good last year too. Like I kind of like that contract, dude. Like a 5-year deal for like a 28-year-old, like 3.6. Like if he plays the way he did last year, that's not a bad ad at all. You know what I mean? But I think they had to deal with a lot this summer, right? Like bringing back Nikash, like bringing back Jarvis. You know what I mean? Like Nikash, they went short term, 6.5. Like Jarvis, 7.4. He's coming off his ELC. So this all kind of probably factored into like the Gensel signing. Like it seemed like Nikash was going to get traded, but then I guess since they couldn't really bring anyone back, like Gensel gone, like Teravainen's gone too, dude. Like
Yeah.
that's another key guy that's gone. I think they honestly like had a lot of guys on really good value contracts like last season and like stuff like that. You know what I mean? That now that's like they all became free agents. It was like there's no way they're gonna fit all these guys in. Like dude, like Pesci was making like $4 million. Like that's a fucking good contract for him. Like you know what I mean? Like Brady Shea was making 5. Now he's making 7. Like Jarvis goes from his ELC to 7. It's like it's so hard to manage the cap, right? And Jarvis is coming off like such a good year. Like he's young, like you got to sign him. You know what I mean? So I think on paper, they're definitely looking a little bit worse, I think, but I don't really question them like making the playoffs. But I just don't know if they're like a cup contender anymore. I guess like they still got some really good pieces. Like it's really going to depend how like Nikash plays and like Jarvis, is he going to have the same year? Like they don't really have that like stud. You know what I mean? Like Aho's a great player, but I don't think he's like really shown that he's like a superstar. You know what I mean? That I think you might need on a team to win a cup, but they're still a really solid team. They got good goaltending too. Like their defense, it's like if it's worse, it's not like that much worse, I think. And like they're already at a really solid decor to begin with, right? So it's like they're definitely like an above average decor. Like I'd probably even like close to top 10 in the league, I would say. So I don't know. Like, do you agree with that? Like I don't see them as a cup contender, but it's like I'd be surprised if they miss the playoffs.
No, I completely agree with you on them not being cup contenders. Honestly, like looking at this roster, man, I would be a bit surprised if they didn't make the playoffs. But like, if they have some injuries to their top guys, dude, like Sheshnikov, like he's been injury prone in the past, right? Like if he gets injured and goes down, man, like they don't really have that many guys that can fill those top holes. Looking at their center depth, you have Kotniemi on your second line, Stahl on your third line. Like I don't like their center depth.
Yeah, that's a huge problem for them is that ever since Trocheck left, they've lacked that 2C. And they haven't been able to they haven't replaced it at all. Jordan Stahl, it's like I like him as a third line center. I think asking him to be a 2C is a bit too much. He plays that defensive shutdown, heavy hockey, and he doesn't produce enough offense. Like in Kotkaniemi, he's never taken that next step, right? So
Yeah.
they really lack that, and they don't have that right now. So I don't know. Like I don't know if their new GM's gonna like risk it and make a trade to like maybe sacrifice even someone on D to like get a center, or like they've got some young guys that could potentially crack the lineup this year too, dude. Like Jackson Blake, Bradley Nadeau, Scott Morrow, like those guys are on the fringe of like making the team. They're still at camp. Like they might try to get a guy on it with an ELC in there. You know what I mean? That's a low cap hit. Like it's kind of something you need when you are a good team. You know what I mean? And you spend a lot of money. You need like good players that are making not a lot of money.
But yeah, for me, I have this team finishing third in the Metro. Honestly, if they get a couple injuries to their top guys, have an injury in their goaltending, like I wouldn't be fully surprised if they miss the playoffs. I think they need to do some work here in the season if they want to be a Stanley Cup contender and sort of as good as they have been over the last 4 or 5 years or so, right? Because over the last 4 or 5 years, you always expected Carolina's going to be up there competing for the top of the Metro, and they're probably going to win a round or two and sort of go on a little run here in the playoffs. Or this year, man, like I don't know, I don't really see him going on a run in the playoffs, and I could see him missing the playoffs, to be honest.
I think a lot of stuff would probably have to go wrong for them to miss the playoffs. Like a lot of guys probably having down years, probably like bad goaltending, but I mean they're definitely worse roster wise, and I think they've definitely taken a step back. Kind of nuts for their like Don Waddell stepping down like a couple weeks before like July 1, and like their new GM is like having to deal with like all of this like so many guys had contracts. Like Martinuk was a UFA, like Chatfield, like those guys came back, but like he's negotiating contracts with like all these different guys. Like is Pesci coming back? Shea, like Gensel, like he had a lot to deal with. Honestly, with the cap space that he had, I think he did a pretty solid job. It's just that I think they're just unfortunate that these guys had really good contracts and they ran out and they just couldn't keep all these guys.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. He got put into a tough situation with not much he could do, but I think he did the best. He did the best job that he could have possibly done. Let's move on to the New York Islanders. Again, not much change with this roster. They bring in Duclair to get a little bit of scoring. For me, New York's a really they're always a really hard team to gauge. Are they going to be good? Are they going to be mid? Like they don't play the most offensive or fun style of hockey. Where do you think they're going to finish though this year?
Yeah, like this team didn't have a lot of turnover. Like just trying to think of like what can change, right? Like we're getting Patrick Waugh now for a full season. Like I don't know how much he could come in and change last year with like 30 something games left. Now he's got a full camp. Like, do you think he's going to let them free more and like play offense, or do you think like as like a former goaltender, like he's going to stick to this defensive style? Like I don't know. Like I think he likes his goaltenders a lot. Like at least like he seems to love Varlamov. I mean, Sorokin,
Yeah.
I'd probably count on him bouncing back. I think he's dealing with kind of like a minor injury right now, but I don't know, dude. They don't have a lot of change. Honestly, they didn't do anything besides Duclair, but I actually really like Duclair as an ad for them. I think that it's a guy that can play up to like Barzell's like speed, and I'm really interested to see it. Like if those guys play together, like how it's gonna be. Like maybe with like Horvat in the middle or something like that. Like that could be honestly a really interesting line to pop off. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Duclair, like if it clicks, he could score like 30 goals this year. Like they wouldn't surprise me one bit. This Maxim Siplikov, he's coming over from the KHL. He decided to sign with the Islanders. He was a 30 goal scorer in the KHL last year. I think he's like 25. So kind of interested to see how he does. Like these Russian guys come over all the time. Some of them doesn't work out. Sometimes it does. You know what I mean? So he's probably going to play somewhere, like I'd say in like the top 9 of their lineup. But besides that, like their identity's always been like their bottom 6 in their defensive style, right? Well, Matt Martin's only there on a PTO. He hasn't been signed, and Clutterbuck's not there. So they've got even a little bit different of like a fourth line, like shaken up this year. So yeah, they didn't do a lot, but they're changing a little bit. So their decor is basically the same. I'm just really curious to see how they play under Patrick Waugh. I think they're going to be like fighting for a playoff spot, fringe team. But honestly, I think that 5 teams are coming out of the Atlantic, and I don't have them making the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think they're gonna be a fringe team, sort of in the fight to the end. But I don't think they make the playoffs. I don't think they have enough scoring or top end talent on this team to make the playoffs. The other thing too, though, that's gonna be interesting for this team in the season is like how's Sorokin gonna perform this year, right? Because last year he wasn't that great last year, and I think if New York does want to make the playoffs, like they're gonna need Sorokin to be back where he was 2 seasons ago. Because if he's not, then Varlamov's a very good backup goalie, but I think the load on him will be too much if it's the same as it was last year with Sorokin just not performing up to par.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to have a huge factor on that as well. I'm really curious to see how Waugh manages the goalies in a full season too, just him being a former goalie himself too. So I don't have them making the playoffs. I wouldn't be if they did, I wouldn't be that surprised. I think a lot of guys would probably have to have some really good seasons for them. But I'm just curious to see how much their playing style is going to change under Patrick Waugh this year.
Let's move on to Washington. This team, they did a fair bit over the offseason, to be honest.
Dude, they probably had the most, like, I think they had probably the most moves out of like any team, I would say.
Oh yeah, I think they had the most. I think they had the most moves too, where it wasn't like most like it's not like the Gensel or it's like the biggest moves of the offseason, but I think they had a lot of very good moves, to be honest. Like they bring in Pierre-Luc Dubois for Darcy Kemper. Like give him a shot. If he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out. If he pans out, that's a great trade for Washington, right? You also bring in Chychrun, you bring in Roy, you bring in Mangiapane. Thompson as well, I'm forgetting about from Las Vegas. Like they made a lot of moves for players who are not young but not old, right? They're sort of in the middle of their prime or entering their prime, and I think it could pan out really well for the Washington Capitals, to be honest. Like you got Ovi there still, you still have that veteran presence, but you're also bringing in some younger players and getting this team a little bit younger, which is nice. What do you think about them though?
Yeah, this is a lot of turnover. I think there's a lot of guys coming in, right? Like that's like 6, 7 guys. That was shocking them getting in the playoffs last year, no doubt. They played well down the stretch, though. You got to give them some credit. They are definitely utilizing their cap space. In accordance to LTIR, Nick Backstrom and Oshie not playing. That's about $15 million. They're still spending to the cap. Like they're paying as much as they can. That they're spending their money. I think pretty solid moves. Even though I don't have them making the playoffs this year, I think that the moves they've made this offseason are really good. on defense, I think for the last couple of years, they've really relied on John Carlson a ton. And I think he's been really good, but I think he's getting older, and I think that it's good that they brought in some help. Good trade to get Chikrin in for Nick Jensen, I think. Like, Chikrin's probably going to get a shot on that top pair. Dude, I love Matt Roy. I think he's one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. He's been one of the best defensive defensemen in the league over the past couple seasons. His offensive numbers are not like awful either, like where it's like he has 10 points or something. Like, he puts up some decent numbers. Pretty long contract for him, 7 years. I think he just got under 6 million. But honestly, dude, like, solid top 4 D man. I don't mind the Dubois move for them. They got out of a contract with a goalie who's, I think, just going downhill in Kemper. It's definitely a huge risk. Kemper's contract only has 3 years left. Dubois, he's got 7. But I mean, it's a new environment for him. It's all going to depend on how bad he wants it, right? Is he going to be motivated to play with Ovechkin? Like, as much as right now, I would put Dylan Strome there. Like, it's not a stretch to say like Dubois can play better than Dylan Strome, because I've seen it at parts in his career, right? So is the fact that he's playing to Ovi and he can set up Ovi, is that going to motivate him? You know what I mean? Like, other moves, like, I like bringing in Logan Thompson after getting rid of Kemper. Low cap hit. He's never been a starter, but I think him and Lindgren can actually be a good tandem. Like Lindgren was really good last year. I think that it's two guys where it's like they're probably around the same, and like they could compete and fight for starts. And I think if one of them's playing really well, they'll be fine. I just have them missing the playoffs by a couple points. It's a lot of turnover, and I don't know if it's all gonna work, at least right away. So I've got them finishing in 4th in the Metro.
Yeah, I have them finishing 5th in the Metro. Honestly, like, their top 6, it was a lot of turnover. I don't mind their top 6. Like, I don't love their top 6, but I do like it with some of the moves that they made over the offseason. Their bottom 6, so I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think it's a little bit young and unproven players in there. Nothing about their bottom 6 really scares me that much. Their defense, I like
Honestly, their defense got better, I think. And in like, I'd say it's like a mid-pack decor. Like, it's not bad, but it's not great. You know what I mean?
And I like their goaltending as well. I like Lindgren. I like bringing in Thompson. As you mentioned, 2 goalies that are going to be able to sort of fight for that starting position. The only thing, though, is like with Lindgren, he had such a phenomenal last season, right? Like, I don't know if he's going to be as good as he was last season, which is partially why I don't think Washington makes the playoffs, and why I have them finishing 5th in this division is just because last year they made the playoffs pretty much because of how phenomenal he was in goal. Where if he doesn't have that season this year, I don't think they're making the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Let's move on though to Washington's longtime rival, Pittsburgh Penguins. Sid, he signed over the offseason, so he's back for 3 more years. Also, a big move with the prospects. Rutger McGorty went from Winnipeg to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh sent back Braden Yager. For me, Pittsburgh, not much changed. It's an older team. I really don't like this team that much, to be honest, like going into the season. How are you feeling about them?
No, I'm not really convinced that this team is going to be good whatsoever. I think there's going to be flashes where they will look good, and it's going to be because Sid is probably still playing at the top of his game. I don't really see him going downhill whatsoever. But I don't really see a situation where this team is even close to making the playoffs. I think they're going to be taking even a step back from last year. I think if they get really good goaltending, maybe they can be a bit better, but it's still a question mark, I think, with Jari and Nedeljkovic. They've both proved to be good at times, but also like very inconsistent as well. Nothing really excites me with this team besides Sid. The one thing with them, though, that will be better is their power play. It was really bad last year.
It was horrendous last year.
And I think that they're probably going to figure it out. So I think that's going to help them at least get some more wins. You know what I mean? But yeah, nothing really excites me about this team. They didn't do much. Like it was a good trade getting like Cody Glass to come in, get a little bit of youth there. I actually like the McGroarty trade is pretty good for them too. Like they're getting a guy who's like NHL ready. I would say he should get the shot. So, and they're bringing in guys like on more like prove it deals. I feel like a couple as well with like Beauvillier and Matt Grzelcyk. But yeah, they're kind of just filling holes in like the bottom of their lineup, and they're aging. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't know. Nothing really excites me with this team besides Sid. I'll still watch them because of Sid. To be honest with you, curious to see how they end up doing, but kind of sucks for him to be not on a really good team near the end of his career. But you got to respect the fact that he re-signed, stayed at 8.7 million. It's gonna have 19 years of his career where he's making 8.7 million dollars. Who knows if he ends up playing after those 2 years too, dude? Like it's crazy to think about, but this guy, dude, he's what, like 37, like 38? Like no, he just turned 37. Like, dude, he put up 94 points, man. Like, I don't know. Like the way he trains and stuff, it's just like I wouldn't be surprised. Like if you put up 100 points, man, like I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I wouldn't be surprised if he put up 100 points at all. Like, look at what he did last season, and that's without their power play being functional.
Oh, I know,
at all, right?
man. Like
even if their power play is running at 50% better than what it was last year, like Sid's, it's probably an extra.
oh, he's probably hitting like
50%.
105 points. Like if
Yeah.
that's the case.
But yeah, for me, as you mentioned, like this team, I'm gonna watch them because it's Sidney Crosby. Outside of that, I think they're an older team that's aging. Not much there that excites me. McGroarty, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with him if he gets the shot in the NHL or if he starts the year in the AHL. Like I've seen a lot of people saying they think he's gonna start the year in the AHL just because his defensive game isn't that great. He's not the best skater, but like that's gonna be interesting for me as well. Outside of that, I don't have too much interest in this team, to be honest. I have them finishing pretty low here in the Metro Division. Next up, we got the Philadelphia Flyers. Biggest move for them really this offseason is getting their 7th overall pick from just a few seasons ago, Matvei Michkov. He's gonna be fun to watch this year. Honestly, I think this team's sort of going to be a little bit better than they were last year. It's going to be interesting to see how everything works out in their net because their net's a massive, massive question mark right now. What do you see with this team, though?
I don't know, dude. They're definitely young, up and coming. They've got some pieces. I don't really see them making the playoffs, though, to be honest. They didn't really change anything besides bringing in Michkov. They re-signed Eric Johnson. Hathaway re-signed. That's contract starts next year. Same with Konechny as well. He got an 8-year deal at 8.75. How do you feel about that contract?
Konechny at 8.75, I think, is a very good deal. I think Konechny is honestly one of the most underrated players in the league.
Yeah, he's kind of like he does a lot, but like I would love to see a season where he puts up like 80 points, but like because he's never really done a huge point total, but he's a player that you kind of want on your team. You know what I mean?
For me, it's more just a style of hockey that he plays. Like he's that tough, gritty guy. He's not afraid to go get the puck in the corner, right? And the other thing too with him is he's never really played with major top end talent, right? Like he played with Claude Giroux. I don't think they were ever on a line though together when Giroux was there. Like he hasn't really played with any top end talent, right? Like if him and Michkov are ever on the same line, they're going to be on the power play together, right? Like Michkov could potentially be the best player Konechny's ever had the chance to play with. So who knows if once he gets like that sort of superstar type of player at some point, if he does put up a lot more points.
Honestly, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
All good.
In accordance to like your question before, like I think that they're a pretty decent team and they can build. I just don't really trust their goaltending. And I think it can really let them down. Their D-core is kind of like, I think it's young, but it's like average right now. So it's like, I think that they could be a team where like they're scoring a lot of goals, but like keeping them out of their net could be a problem. And that's going to drive Torts crazy. To go back, I said the Islanders would finish 5th in this division. I would think they're actually going to finish 6th. I think Philly's probably going to finish 5th. What do you expect from Michkov this year? Like, is this a season for him where he's looked really good in the preseason? Do you think 30 goals is realistic for him? I think he's going to get an opportunity in the top six, like pretty quickly.
He's going to be on the top six. He's going to be first power play.
He's very good, like around the net.
Yeah.
So like on the power play, he's going to be around the net a lot.
For me, the question mark with him is like, how's that whole relationship with Torts going to be, right? Like, I don't think 30 goals is out of the question. If I was a betting man, I'd be curious to see what the over under on his goals like total for the season.
I think it's 21.5 the last time I saw.
See, I'm taking the over on that. Like 21.5, I think he smashes that, dude. I think he's scoring at least 25 this year. I don't know if he hits 30, to be honest. Like he's a generational talent, man. Like when you look back at that draft class, if there wasn't the whole Russia factor and the whole he's still under contract in the KHL, he would have been the no doubt second overall pick. Like no doubt.
I would say like honestly, like he probably has a higher ceiling than even like Carlson and Fantilli.
Yeah,
like in my opinion, at least. Like
the only difference with Fantilli and Carlson is that they're centermen, right? Like,
yeah.
When people talk about Matvei Michkov, especially in that draft class, like they were saying he might be the best Russian prospect since Ovi. Like
yeah, like the numbers that he's putting up is like pretty nuts, right? Like for goals, like dude, I wanted Montreal to draft him. Like it's
we know
great.
We know about that.
It's good. They could have had Michkov and Demidov. But yeah, like I think there's like if he put up 30, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he's probably looking in the Calder conversation if he gets 30. But yeah, I think it's going to depend like how he plays, especially on the defensive side of the puck as well, just because Torts really stresses that. But honestly, I think he's probably end up with like, I think 25. I think you're right. I'd say maybe 25 and 20 assists, like 45 points, I'd say. But that's still a really solid season for like a 19-year-old.
Oh, that's a great season for a 19-year-old playing under Torts too. Like
we're talking about Slavkovsky taking a step at 19, putting up 50 points. Like 45 is pretty solid.
But yeah, for me, the goaltending, it's a massive question mark. Ersson at points last year, he was good. There's points there that
and look, dude, it has nothing against him. Like he was just put into a very like unfair situation where the whole Carter Hart thing happened, and there was a point after that, like a couple months later, where he had played the most minutes in the NHL of any goalie, because they couldn't really trust their backup, and then they finally got Fedotov over, but he barely even played, right? So I don't know. He's probably going to give both guys a shot to earn the net. You know what I mean? Curious to see how Fedotov does and like adapts to the North American style, but because dude, he was kind of like ready to come a couple of years ago. Like he was literally going to compete for a spot on their team and potentially make the team. So curious to see how it goes, but I don't expect them to make the playoffs, but I think they're going in the right direction right now.
Yeah, I don't have them making the playoffs either. Goaltending is the biggest question mark for me. And then also just the Torts factor, right? Like towards the end of the season, how the players going to start feeling about Torts. It's a long season. We know Torts is a tough coach, and maybe it plays a factor there. Let's move on to maybe the most interesting team in the Metro going into this season based off what happened last year. It's the New Jersey Devils. They had a decent bit of changes. Mourinho, Holtz, Smith all left the team. They brought in probably the biggest move that they needed, Jacob Markstrom from the Calgary Flames. Like last year, their goaltending was horrendous last year. And they brought in Markstrom, who's a proven veteran goaltender. And with him, he's going to be able to stop the puck. The other thing, too, with this team is they bring in Sheldon Keefe as a new head coach. Where do you see this team finishing?
I really like this team. I think the offseason moves they made are really good. I think they've got a really solid D-core right now. Obviously, their goaltending was a problem. Jake Allen coming in last year at the end of last season gave him a little bit of stability. I think him and Markstrom are going to be a great tandem. Yeah. I think like you can still give Jake Allen 30 games and like Markstrom 50 or something. And I think that's good enough to easily get you in the playoffs. Their D-core got better, dude. Marino out, Brett Pesce in. We're talking about how good of a defenseman he is. Dougie Hamilton's going to be back. I think their defense lacked a little bit of like grit. Like Kevin Ball was a guy they had, obviously, but he went over in that Markstrom trade. He's a big guy, but he's not like super physical, at least like now. Brendan Dillon, he's a solid player, dude. Like he's kind of the guy you need. He can play in the top four. He hits a ton. He blocks shots. Like a lot of guys, a lot of defensemen on their team are very offensive minded, like Luke Hughes, Dougie, you know what I mean? So I think Dillon's a really solid ad for them. They brought in Jonathan Kovacevic from Montreal. I'm familiar with him. He's probably gonna be like their 7th D. Honestly, if he's their 7th D, dude, like they're in a really good situation because I think he should be playing like every single night. But like even up front, dude, like Paul Cotter, he came in that Alex Holtz trade. That was the one trade that kind of confused me, man. I was very underwhelmed. It was like Cotter and a third for Holtz and Akira Schmid. I honestly would have liked them to keep Holtz and give it a shot under Keefe. But I mean, Cotter's a guy, he hits a lot. They want to bring a little bit more sandpaper into their game as well, right? I really like the moves they made, even like with Stefan Nason, like from Carolina. That's another guy that they lost. He's a solid third line player. I think Keefe is going into a really good situation, man. I think he's got a huge opportunity. I think honestly, if they have a chance to win their division, I think it's between them and the Rangers. And if they win the division, dude, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets coach of the year.
Yeah, I have this team winning the division, man. Like you're gonna have Jack Hughes back and healthy for a full season. Like he's never Jack Hughes still hasn't broken 100 points in his NHL
It sucks that Luke is out to begin the year. But I think that their decor can definitely handle it. Like, dude, Simone Nemec made a pretty good impact last year, and he's only playing on the third pair. Like, they're in a good spot, dude. Like, I would be shocked if they miss the playoffs again. Like, they have a very solid team.
I think they finished first in the division, man. Like last year, they dealt with a lot of injuries. They dealt with their goaltending being horrendous. Timo Meier last year didn't really live up to everything that it was when he came over from San Jose and signed that contract, right? Like I think Timo Meier's gonna have a huge year this year. He's gonna be playing with Hughes and Brad on that first line. Like that might be the best first line in the entire NHL.
Hughes, well, yeah, Brad, and it's like I honestly really like Dawson Mercer too. He had a down year last year, but he signed for $4 million. I think that he's going to be a solid player for them as well. I really like this team. They've got the first line center. He'd be a first line center on a lot of teams. He's playing at 2C. Eric Holla as 3C. Like, I think this team is built really well. They can still make some moves throughout the season as well to like add to whatever they feel like they need. But I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this team is like competing for the Stanley Cup around playoff time.
I'm 100% with you. First in the Metro for me and going on a deep playoff run. I for sure see that. Let's move on to the last team we have here in the Metro. It's the Columbus Blue Jackets. Tough way to start the year for Columbus. Monahan, he comes in though. I like that for him. Jack Johnson, he comes in. They lose Laine though. They lose Nylander. How are you feeling about them?
Yeah, obviously, really tough for them, right? To lose a guy of that caliber, a guy you're familiar with as well, for the most part, and Johnny Gaudreau. Honestly, I just hope his team can like kind of like rejuvenate themselves and like there's a lot of young talent on this team. I think that if a lot of it pans out, like they're definitely heading in the right direction. Don Waddell's coming in from Carolina. They've got a more experienced GM. They've got Dean Evison as well from Minnesota. I think he's going to have these guys playing hard this year, man. I think that they're looking for progression from their young players, though. Like, can Cole Sillinger, Kent Johnson take the next step? Chinnikov, like Marchenko, like Adam Fantilli. Like, there's a lot of young guys here, and there's a lot of opportunity for these guys as well. Like, is Adam Fantilli going to be like the best player on their team this year? Like, he's got the potential where he can take that step and do that. You know what I mean? One thing I really hope for them is guys stay healthy. They've definitely had like injury troubles. One guy I really want to stay healthy and see a full season out of is Zach Werenski. I think he's a fantastic player, and he just doesn't get that credit because he's just really struggled to stay healthy. You know what I mean? But I think you just want to see progression from the young guys on this team for sure. They're getting Jordan Harris from Montreal in that line A trade, a guy I'm familiar with. He's a really solid kind of defensive defenseman. I'd say like kind of like a number 5 guy, skates well. So I think he's going to bring them some like consistency and stability back there. But yeah, what do you think? Like I think you just want to see progression from the young guys. They've kind of got some pieces that'll help them in the long run, right? Like Juracek on D, like does Denton Mateychuk make the team? Like as a young D, like in 5 years, if things pan out, like I think this team's going to be in the playoffs, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say competing for the cup, but like they have enough talent where it's like I think they can make the playoffs in a couple of years if these young guys where they've picked high like end up progressing and doing well, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. They have a lot of young players here who were picked high, like first, second rounders in the lineup, and you just want to see them progress. Like this team is not making the playoffs this year. I think this team's gonna be similar position to where they were last year, back with like a top 5, maybe just outside the top 5 pick, right? Like I don't really see this team competing too much throughout the season, but I think for them it's just like, can these younger players take that next step? Like you want Fantilli to progress, turn into the player that we all think he's going to be. Like Kent Johnson, he was looking phenomenal as couple seasons ago, right? Like we all thought he was going to sort of pan out. He's not getting older, but he's not that young prospect like he once was. You sort of want to see him grow into the player that we all think he's going to be. I think for them it's just really hoping these players can grow and doing the right things. So it is in 5 years, this team can be competing for a Stanley Cup championship. The other thing too with this team, to be honest, is their goaltending is, I think.
Yeah, I don't really trust it. Like I think Elvis has just been kind of going on the downhill the past couple of years. Like obviously playing on not a great team doesn't help, but we saw Korpisalo a couple of years ago look pretty good in Columbus when they weren't good. Tarasov, honestly, as a backup had decent numbers last year. So I don't know. Like he's a young guy. Like he's like 25 years old. Like can he take over the net from Elvis? Like can he show like as a young goalie like that maybe he can take the reins in the future? And like I don't want to say be their future number 1 guy, but like at least like part of the solution down the road, right? He's a 3rd round pick, I think in like 2019 or something. Elvis I think wants out. I don't
Yeah,
think that. I think they decided not to buy him out, and I just don't think that anyone wants him, to be quite honest with you.
yeah,
I think even getting him at like half retained would be like 2.7, and it's like I'm not even that like thrilled to take him on at that. Like, you know what I mean? So I think they're kind of just dealing with it right now. Like they probably would have to pay a lot to get rid of him. Like I think he's got 3 years left on his deal, so I just don't think they're willing to do that. They're just keeping him right now, trying to figure it out. But I wouldn't be that surprised if he's gone eventually. But it'd be pretty good to get out of that contract. You also see that they're going to be beginning the season like underneath the cap floor. The NHL's making an exception for them. They're giving them there's no real time period for them to hit the cap floor. But they're just saying take your time with it. Like you don't have to rush and trade
yeah.
for a guy, or they didn't feel like just going out and signing a guy like I guess they realistically could have went out and given JVR like $4 million just to hit the cap floor, but I don't think they really wanted to do that, and like I don't think the league wanted them to do that necessarily. So they also put, I don't know if you saw that Gaudreau was paid a $2 million bonus on July 1st. They added that to the cap this year. It
Okay.
was like a $2 million to the cap. So they're technically like $1.5 million under it right now. But you know what I mean? They'll probably make some. They're interested in a veteran forward right now. And I think it's actually good if they add a veteran forward. I think they've got a lot of young guys, and I think they could use another veteran forward to come in. You know what I mean? So I think they'll probably get to that cap floor like before the new year, like or something. But I mean, yeah, kind of interested to see what they do. Like JVR is not a bad signing for them. I think he's a veteran. He's been around a really long time. He's pretty good on the power play as well. You know what I mean? But who do you think they could go after? Like, do you think they would go after, like, they won't be giving up somewhere where it's like a 1st round pick or something, but I don't know. Like, I like maybe like Dvorak or
Even Dvorak though, like he is younger, but like
I honestly just want to get rid of him, I think, then.
Like Dvorak, for this team, I think they need like even more of a veteran presence than Dvorak, to be honest, right? Like I'm thinking somebody more who's like early 30s,
Yeah.
like Calle Jarnkrok maybe. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, honestly.
Like
Maybe even like, or if even it was like Kampf, they wanted to move on from Kampf or something.
yeah, like I'm trying to think of players that are like older veteran players that might be on the move too, which is like there's not many names that are getting thrown around right now too, right? That are all on the market because everybody's like with the start of the season, all the talk is really the PTO is if who's gonna get signed.
They can also like, they might even go like the waiver route. Like there could be a guy put on waivers where they feel like they could pick up and could make over like $1 million or whatever it is as well. So
Yeah, definitely for them is just get the progression, get some veterans in there, and teach these younger guys how to play hockey the right way, right? While we're still talking about Columbus, though, let's move on to the Gaudreau brothers and what the NHL is doing for them. The NHL has announced that all 32 teams are going to be wearing a special helmet decal through October 24th to honor Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau. The decals feature a G in the middle with Johnny's number 13 and Matthew's number 21 on each side. I really like this move by the NHL. I think it's really classy. I know it's only till October 24th, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a thing that really lasts all season because we all saw throughout the past month or so, like how much Johnny and Matthew really meant to the hockey world. And not only how great hockey players they were, but how great human beings they were, right? And I think everybody in the hockey world right now is really, really just understanding that and how shitty of a thing this is to happen to the family.
yeah, you basically you summed it up, dude. It's I think it's probably gonna end up happening throughout the entire season. Um, just really liking as well how Columbus decided to like leave his stall with his
Yep.
jersey and stuff. To leave his stall with his jersey and stuff. I thought that was really cool. So, I mean, good on the league for doing that. I hope it ends up lasting the whole season. I hope there's something else that they can do as well. Like, I mean, not to like pressure them or anything, but I mean, it would be cool if there's something else they can incorporate as well for these two guys.
Yeah, I'm for sure with you on that. That pretty much wraps up this week's episode. It's going to be out just before the global series that's taken place in Prague, Czechia. So it's going to be out Friday. We're going to try to do our Western Conference preview before all the action takes place on Tuesday. So look for that coming out either Monday night or Tuesday, sort of in the morning or during the day. But we'll have the Western preview out early next week. So keep tuned for that. And thanks for listening, everybody.